Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, July 15th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 47 days, the game against Michigan in 138 days. Mentioned last week that we had a request from a board member at BuckeyeHuddle.com for more X's and O's content. So guess what? Today you're getting more X's and O's content. Talked about the defense last week with Devin Radcliffe, one of our X's and O's guys at Buckeye Huddle. Today we're going to be talking about the offensive side of the ball with Justin Whitlatch. He is another one of our X's and O's guys. We got a whole bunch of them. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to learn about this year's Ohio State team. And Justin, let's start. We're going to talk the offense and passing game today. You got a chance to watch Will Howard film. You got a chance to watch the spring game just to kind of get an idea what the Buckeyes might be thinking in the passing game. So just run through kind of what you've looked at and what you learned so far.
Usually, as a former coach, used to be offensive coordinator, when you go into a certain year or new year, you've got new experience or you've got a new quarterback in your system, I think you got to look at the analytics piece first. So if you look at Will Howard last year in 2023, so he averaged around 30 attempts with a 60% completion percentage. So if you kind of calculate that out, he's typically 18 out of 30 on any given Saturday. He would average 2 TDs a game with about 220 passing, and then he took about 1 sack a game. He did have about 7-8 carries a game. Some of those were reads, some of those were called in the huddle. But then I think you also have to look at what were we last year? Where did we statistically align with where Howard was? So if you look at last year's film, or if you look at last year's analytics, I should say, so Kyle McCord was about almost identical in terms of numbers. We were at last year, he averaged about 29 attempts. He was a 65% completion percentage. So if you take those numbers, he's about 19 out of 29 on any given Saturday, 2 touchdowns a game, about 1 sack a game. And then he typically finished in the negative rushing yards with sacks. Obviously, they didn't really run any zone read or anything with him. So if you look at the stats alone, pretty identical quarterbacks. I think what sets them apart is the positive rushing. So obviously, that's going to be implemented, in my opinion, this year with Ohio State. But when you look at the statistics, and as an offensive coordinator, and when you go into any certain game, you've got to think, okay, I've got 30 attempts with this guy. That's what we're averaging. We've got a 60% completion percentage. Like, how many shot play calls am I going to have here? How many RPOs are we going to run with him consistently? And I'm going to get to that a little bit later on. But those are some of the things that's going to go on in the meetings when the offseason starts. Like, we've got Howard. Okay, we got 30 attempts a game. How many shot plays? Usually offenses average around 5 shot plays a game. You average about 5 to 10 drop back, about 5 to 10 play action. And then RPO is obviously all dependent on your head coach. So we'll kind of start with the numbers there. I wanted to give everybody the numbers look identical from what last year was in terms of the numbers. Skill set, obviously, I think is a big difference here. So when you look at, I watched, I think, 3 all 22 games on Howard, and I watched their toughest games for the year. I think that's when you see the skill set come alive. When the pressure gets tough, like, that's when you see guys come alive usually. And that's when you see the technique, either they're as a fault or you see them succeed. So, like, when you look at his tape, I think the best thing about him when he's at his best is when he's on time. So I think he's a pure progression reader. There's offenses where you're in a 1-2-3 system. You think an air raid. And then you've got different systems like the West Coast where quarterbacks have to move defenders with their eyes. Let's say you're running a curl flat concept. You've got to be able to move that flat defender with your eyes or get him away from where you want the ball to go. So there's different ways you can do that. And I think Day kind of blends those two together. But I think when you're looking at his tape, he's a pure progression passer. Obviously, I think he's got all the arm angles that you're going to ask of a quarterback. He's got the strength to get the ball wherever you need it to get to. And I think one thing a lot of people is overlooking is he played at Kansas State. That head coach was a former North Dakota State head coach as well, where they have a vast playbook. That's an NFL-style playbook. So quarterbacks in that system are allowed to check at the line. They're allowed to help ID the mic or whoever you're setting the protection to. So they've got a vast playbook where he's going to be able to do those things here at Ohio State, what I think people take for granted. You didn't see that a lot last year with Kyle. I mean, if you think back to C.J. Stroud did everything at the line of scrimmage. So I think this will be another opportunity for them to trust the quarterback to get them in the right play call. If they're in a run look, they don't. If they're in a run like an 18-19 outside zone, they've got a walked up safety to the run side. He's going to be able to get them out of a bad look. And I think that's often overlooked with quarterbacks. And I think that's one thing they're going to be able to trust him with, is they're going to be able to trust him with setting the protection, which is huge. Just having that monkey off your back and knowing your quarterback can do that is huge for a head coach and an offensive coordinator. Obviously, experience, you can't teach experience. He has that. I think that's a given with him. One of the best things I saw about him is he throws the mesh concept very well. And Ohio State's run that a lot in the past. Kansas State ran a lot of it with him, and they also ran it with a lot of tags. So I think that's going to be one concept that we see a ton this year, just based on the success we've seen on film with Howard. And if you look at their film as well, Kansas State runs a lot of RPOs, pre and post snap. And I think that's one thing Ohio State needs to start evolving more into. I think they've dabbled in it the past couple years, and I think they've got to really marry it moving forward to help the run box numbers. I know Will Howard's going to be able to do that with his legs a little bit more than they've done in the past. But when you're thinking personnel, when you're thinking of an offense, and you're thinking of your passing offense, I should say, you've also got to think of like who's receiver is going to be this year. So if you're thinking the depth chart, you've got Carnell Tate at Z, you've got Jeremiah Smith at the X, you've got Emeka at the slot, and then tight end I think is a question mark because I don't know what Day is going to ask them to do. I don't know if they're going to live in 11 personnel, or are they going to live in 12, or are they going to live in 10. But given who they have in that room, I think it's a weaker room. In my opinion, I think it's a weaker room. So I think this is a year where you see like a second slot in the game, like Brandon and S. I think that would play to the strengths of what they have in that unit right now. So you've got 4 guys that really can take the top off. So you've got possession receivers there. So I think playing to their strength is going to be huge. But when we talk about like what scheme are we going to get to, in my opinion, before we get into what I wanted to talk about, like the play wise, concept wise, like with my opinion, I don't think a lot of the past concepts will change this year. I think they're going to be able to dress those concepts really, really well. They're going to be able to motion guys. They're going to be able to stack guys. They're going to be in a lot of bunch jets to get some of those guys free releases. And I think you got to play to the quarterback strength. So when you're doing that, I think you've got to run a lot of pure progression-based concepts. I think obviously the running game is going to dictate where the passing game goes. I think they're the 2 running backs that they have will be able to always take the top off if needed. We've got a possession receiver, I think, in Trayvon Henderson. I think you've got to be able to utilize that as well. Get him in mismatches and linebackers. And I think in a lot of the air raid staples, you're able to do that. You're able to get the back out, and you're able to get mismatches on linebackers. So it's going to go as the run game goes. And I know it was kind of the same a year ago. I know we struggled in that scenario last year, is being able to have a consistent run game to help Kyle out. I know that really never came to fruition at times, but I think that, again, that's going to play a huge part, I think, this year as well. And the thing with Will Howard, I think this year is you're going to be able to even numbers in the box. So last year with Kyle, I don't think they gave him a lot of opportunity because he doesn't have that skill set to use those legs. So I think Will's going to be able to read on ends on like outside zone concept. We're reading the backside end. If you're thinking inside zone, we're still reading the backside end. I think they've got all those tools in the toolbox they're going to be able to use for him to also help slow play backside defensive ends. And I think that's been a huge detriment the past couple of years. Is like we're running the mid zone concept, the outside zone, backside penetration and backside pressure was a huge negate in negative plays. And I think having a quarterback who has that type of threat that could potentially pull the ball, I think that's going to make defensive ends slow play it. And I think that's going to be huge for the cutback this year. And I think, and I wrote down as well, I think the passing game is also going to be dictated on how they use their Y. If they feel as if their Y needs to be in the game, if they need to use a tight end, I think you'll see more of like the play action, safer throws, safer concepts, because they've got a tight end on the field that they got to keep in the box, and that would be 3 routes out. So it also depends on what they're going to do at the wide position and how much he wants to utilize 11 or 12 or 10. I think it all depends on that. But in my opinion, after watching kind of some of the Howard tape, seeing kind of what we did last year and basing on those analytics, I don't think a lot's going to change concept-wise. I think they're just going to have to do a really good job of dressing it up and being able to help dictate numbers in the running game in the box to kind of help that, if that makes sense. So if the running game can hit, I think that's going to open up a lot in the passing game. Everyone always says that, but it's true. And I think Howard having the threat of using his legs will help opening up that passing game as well. So that's kind of what I have, like analytics piece, kind of thinking over the personnel piece after watching film. But that's kind of where I'm at. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to touch on a couple things. You went through a million pieces there, and I just want to define a couple terms that you were using that people, I think people probably know, but maybe not everyone's as up to speed on this stuff. So when you talk about 11 personnel, anytime you're using a number, it could be 20 personnel, 21 personnel. The first number, there are 5 eligible players who are not a quarterback. So that's the first number is the number of running backs on the field. The second number is the number of tight ends on the field. And the number of wide receivers is implied by 5 minus whatever those first 2 numbers are. So 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. 10 personnel, 1 running back, no tight ends, 4 wide receivers. So that's just, and if it's 22 personnel, that's 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. It's just five is the total number there, and it's running backs, tight ends, and then whatever that third number is your wide receivers. And then the other thing, you talked about mesh there, and I think that's probably a term that people have heard on broadcasts a bunch over the years. If you want to picture what mesh is, it's an old Mike Leach air raid thing where you get guys crossing over the middle, and you put that middle linebacker in conflict and you get guys running into each other in man. If you are trying to picture what this looks like in your head, think back to the first half of the 2018 Ohio State Michigan game, where Ohio State just ran it over and over and over again and had Michigan guys crashing into each other and guys running free. That's mesh. So when he's talking about mesh, that's what it is. Those are the 2 things that I had in my head that people might just need a little refresher on. Here's another one that they have heard, I'm sure, a term on TV broadcasts a whole bunch. RPO, run pass option. That's something that it became such a fad in college football a couple of years ago, and every play looks like an RPO at certain points. So let's talk a little bit about the quick game RPO concepts and what those could do for Ohio State this fall.
Now, before we get into that, as you mentioned, 11 and 12 personnel, and I did have wrote down the Y is going to dictate a lot of the passing game. I do want to allude a little bit more to that. So I know Day likes to run a lot of 12 personnel. So as a defensive coordinator, most defensive coordinators in 12 personnel will be base of the base. It's hard to really show a different look pre and post snap with 12 personnel. So it's all dependent on the tight ends. And I know he uses 12 personnel a ton to get somebody in their base. So in college football today, you either get defenses in their base by going as fast as you can, like fastball, like the Gus Malzahns of the world, trying to get as many plays in, making defenses be base, or you dictate it by personnel. So that obviously the heavier that you're going to get personnel-wise at 11 and 12, the more base you're going to get and heavier linebacker bodies in the game. That's also what I wanted to talk about. It's also going to be dictated by the Y. In terms of the passing game and the RPO game, it's something I've wanted Day to it's like triple option. If you do it, just do it as much as you can and do it on consistently every single snap. I think it's a safe option. I know Ohio State's always run into some -1 and -2 looks in the box. So that's meaning we've got a safety come down, we've got an extra linebacker in the box, and we're just outnumbered. So it's not a good run look. I think this helps clean that box up. And I noticed if you look at kind of some of their install, a lot of their quick game is actually labeled as quick game /RPO. So I think most OCs today are running RPOs attached to the run game, and they're not even calling it quick game anymore. So I think it's going to help elevate that. And I know I've posted a ton on my Twitter about kind of what that helps with the box. So obviously Ohio State has struggled with having extra guys in the box, the safety roll down and 3 backers in the box. I think once you get in a lighter personnel, like a 10 personnel where your receivers are kind of out of the box, it cleans the box up for the offensive line. And I think we've struggled with communication, being able to double team and get to that next level because there's so many bodies in the box. And for offensive linemen, it's more confusing, more bodies moving around, or slanting and angling. It's hard to determine where I need to get to. So I think if you're consistently running RPOs or your quick game off your run game, it's going to help clean those looks up. And for Will Howard, Kansas State did that a ton. So it's going to play to his strengths. He's got the quick release. He's got all the arm angles that you need. when you run the RPO game. And at Kansas State, they were reading a lot of linebackers, so that's a lot of second level RPOs. I haven't seen a lot of third level RPOs where you're reading a safety, like the glance routes that you see on Saturdays as well. But I see a lot of second level RPOs. Ohio State dabbles in it. I would love for them to marry it and just say, all right, we're going to do this. This is going to be our thing for quick game. So I think that's how it's going to help it this year. And I would hope they kind of get to it. So if you see in the spring game, and I've alluded to it, they ran some outside zone. And on the back side of it, they're running a slant flat combo where they're reading the Mike linebacker. And if he's going to play the run, we're going to throw the slant right behind his ear. If he's going to play the pass, obviously that's going to give us more numbers in the box, and he's going to be out of the box. So it kind of cleans up the look a little bit, if that makes sense.
We have a list of quick game and RPO concepts that we're going to be putting on the screen there. And they all have real fun, different names. And lion and tiger and puma and cougar and panther. And so there's real subtle differences to these plays. Some of them look very similar. So, the difference between lion and tiger, for example, they look very similar, but obviously they're different plays. So what are some of the fine differences? And we don't need to go like play by play on this, but what are the types of things that you're just sort of tweaking and adjusting between some of these different plays?
So a lot of these, it's all dependent on coverage. So if you're thinking lion, which is top left-hand corner there, a lot of teams RPO-wise will run lion if you're playing press man, cover one, where you've got to get off that release, if that makes sense. That's technically a man beater. That's a mid-low red zone RPO that a lot of teams run. So you're thinking inside the 15, I've got a run concept called. If I've got a terrible look in the box, I've got lion attached backside where if I can get, Emeka, Jeremiah Smith, if I can get him one-on-one and I feel comfortable throwing that, I have the opportunity to rip that out there, if that makes sense. And I alluded to the slant-flat combo, which some people will refer to dragon. So that's usually a zone coverage beater RPO. You're trying to, when you're running an RPO, you're trying to mess with somebody that has a run responsibility and a pass responsibility. So you're trying to mess with run fit for them. So when you're running like a concept like that, it's a zone coverage beater, if that makes sense. So, and that's why a lot of these are listed. And they look fairly similar, but they're different. It all depends on coverage. I know when Ohio State goes to play Oregon, their offensive coordinator, he is very heavily involved in doing the same thing. They're going to run any type of RPO that's a coverage beater on the backside of all runs. I'll be interested to see how they play that. But that's becoming the norm now. Is we got a run called, but what's the coverage going to be, and what RPO can defeat that coverage? So it used to be like, hey, we're going to read a defender. If he plays this, we're going to throw behind him. If he's going to play the run, if he's going to play the pass, we're going to hand the run. But now people are running coverage beaters, RPOs, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what you see here is, like, for example, like Puma, you see at the two wide receiver side, you can actually hear in the huddle in the spring game, Day calls this in the huddle. I can't remember the quarterback at the time. But they run it inside a low red zone. So that's almost a third level read there. You're trying to read a safety who's going to fit the run, and you're throwing it behind him if he's going to fit the run. That's a third level read. That's usually a one high post safety look. So you're thinking cover 3, cover 1 beater if he's going to play the run, or throwing it right behind his ear. So it all depended on coverage, really. If we're looking at anything like, usually if you see like the T swing there, the Bengal, those are like what people call like box number RPOs, or just number RPOs. So like if I have the numbers out of receiver, if I have 2 receivers out to my right, and we've got, let's say, just a corner, but we have a safety at 15 yards, to us, that's a win. We're going to throw that RPO out because we have the numbers. The safety's at too much depth for them to make the play. So we should have the numbers and leverage to throw the ball out there. So it's all dependent. I know it's a long, extended answer, but just think a lot of these are coverage beaters. And then if you see like a quick screen, if you see, people call it smoke screen, T swing, do I have the numbers out there to throw it? If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I know the RPO, this is one of these things you hear on broadcast all the time. If you run it correctly, it can't be stopped. You're constantly putting guys in a no-win position. Now, offenses do get stopped, and offenses are getting stopped on RPOs, even with linemen 5 yards downfield not getting called. I've listened to enough defensive coaches complain about that over the years that I know that that's a little bit of a sticking point, the uncalled illegal man downfield penalties. So, are these plays that if you run them correctly, they can't be stopped and it's just guys making the wrong reads? Or, are there, is there stuff that defenses can do that can take away, take these things away, and make it so it's not a, win-win situation?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. That's a question I actually listened to Dan Lanning answer recently. So your offensive coordinator runs all these different coverage RPO beaters. Like how are you going to prepare for that? How would you prepare for that if you're the DC? And he obviously gave a huge answer. But a lot of defenses will like banjo, they'll switch responsibilities. Like the nickel, let's say we got a nickel in a corner, the nickel will take the inside, the corner will take the first outside. So it's almost like thinking zone coverage in basketball, 2-3 zone. Someone comes into my zone, I'm taking him. So if number 2 is going in, so the nickel would have the 2 going in. If 1 going out, then the corner would have 1 going out. So playing different types of switch releases for the defense, I think would be pretty big. But it's hard to stop, especially if you have guys that are really good of being able to get off press. They're able to get off these certain looks. And when it comes down to it, if you're going to banjo those type of receivers, you still have to win. You still have to win the one-on-one when that receiver gets there. So it's all talent dependent. There is calls to negate some of this stuff, but you still got to win. So I think that's huge. And that's why I want Ohio State to go more into this direction, because they have those guys that can win consistently on the outside.
Well, if the next play we're going to talk about is called spread, and when I pulled it up, I thought, I have run this in NCAA football for 20 years. And, the first thing my eyes go to is, hey, see the guy running the 9 route on the left side of the field? That's my first read, at least when I have a controller in my hand. I don't know how, the progression is going to go for Ohio State when they're running this fall, but run everyone through spread.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about, like, scheme-wise, what I think, what they're going to throw at Will Howard. So this is usually day 1 install for them. And if you look at the spring game, in the spring game, they're going to just throw their base stuff. They want to see if their quarterback can handle their base of the base. But spread is if people think it in the air raid world as Y cross. So spread is Y cross in Ohio State's terms. This is you're running a flood to the weak side of formation. So let's say I've got trips right, and we've got one receiver on my left. We're going to be running Y cross into the boundary, into the weak side. So it's a weak side flood. This is one of their concept that they use consistently every year. Every quarterback they've run it consistently, and I think this is going to be one of their staples with Will Howard. So when you're thinking Y cross, it's pure progression. So I talked earlier about Will Howard's a really good pure progression passer. He gets to that 1, 2, 3 quickly, and when he's on time, he's really good. I do think one of his weaknesses is when he's not on time and when he has to create. I think he's really bad. So I think Ohio State's got to do a really good job of game planning when they're going to attack the protection. Like, do they have an answer for him when that protection breaks down? Do they have a back that's going to be out when it breaks down? But when it comes to spread, it's Y cross. Usually teams will start with the first progression read to the vertical there, and then the second progression read will be kind of to the over route. So the over route is you're able to defeat technically every coverage that's thrown at you when you run that crossing route. So in my eyes, I would love for Emeka to be this guy who's going to be the crossing guy. So like if they're in man coverage, usually you're trying to run to the sideline, you're trying to run away from the defender. If you've got like a 2-high cover 2, you're trying to middle hole that cover 2 there, and that's Will Howard's got to hit in the middle of the cover 2. If you got quarters, obviously there's a couple of different things you can hit there, but you're typically running the crossing route. So it's designed to beat every coverage. So that's usually the second read, and then your third read usually is to the flat there. And then the fourth read usually gets to the backside dig. Usually you never get there. If you do get there, it's usually when like a 5 technique crosses my face and I got to get up in the pocket. Usually that comes in my window as I'm moving my feet into the pocket. So I think that's going to be a staple for them. It's easy. It's pure progression. You can dress it up 1,000 different ways. So I think this is going to be day 1 install, and I think this is one you'll see consistently.
All right, next up is I love this name. Just we had all the cats in the RPO game. Got spread, which is a great football term. This one, Hank, just Hank. Little King of the Hill shout out there. I don't know. You're going to run some propane. You're going to run some propane accessories. This looks like a great one for like 3rd and 6. This just screams 3rd and 6 to me. What are you trying to do with Hank?
So I think I've tweeted Hank out from Ohio State 1,000 different times for the last 4 years. This is also a day staple. This is one of his favorites. You can run it on first down, you can run it on normal down, and it can also be a good third and medium call. And he does a really good job of dressing it up. But what Hank really is doing is you're trying to expand, you're trying to beat the coverage horizontally. So you're trying to expand all those guys horizontally and defeat zone coverage. Usually cover 3 beater. In cover 3, like let's say we're looking let's say we're looking to the left side there. We've got cover 3. You've got a safety bailing, corner bailing. You're usually reading the flat defender from the curl to the flat. Easy read, pure progression usually. You can read curl to flat, or you can teach your quarterback. You've got to put eyes on the flat defender. Flat defender squeezes the curl, then I've got to throw the flat. He's going to run with the flat and expand with the flat, then I've got to throw the curl. The curl's got to find the window as well. So this is a really good coverage beater. This is one that he runs a ton. The only downfall of Hank is if you get press man or if you get any press zone, usually it's a kill. That's one you want to kill and you want to get to a new call, if that makes sense. But again, this is going to be a staple, I think, this year as well. It's just how many different ways can they dress it up, and then how many different personnel sets can they dress it up in?
All right, and the last one we wanted to talk about is just called Net. Another great, just very simple name. But I look at this and I'm like, oh boy, trips, and you got crossers out of the trips. This just feels like a great way to have, someone bump into someone else and someone ending up running wide open. Walk us through Net.
So Net, it's mesh really is what it is. Mesh with a post attached to it. I think this will mesh, and then like I said earlier, tags off mesh will be a bread and butter in my mind because he throws it so well. Obviously, you want to tend to your quarterback and what he does really well. And I think mesh was one of his best concepts. He's able to read. He's able to pure progress that read consistently. But it's typically designed to beat man coverage. So you're trying to get a pick. You don't want to say pick, but it's a pick play to get somebody open. And you're wanting defenders to hit each other. Obviously, it's a man beater. Everybody knows there's a man beater. What Ohio State and Day will do usually also with their T there, they'll run him on a wheel release there to try to get the mic to run over top, if that makes sense, of the crossers to kind of match that. So I think mesh will be one of their best concepts. And I think if you can isolate, like Jeremiah Smith will probably be their deep guy this year since he's the X receiver. If you can tag him here, like on mesh concept, if tag him with a post, you could tell Will before the snap, hey man, if you're seeing press man one high, let's see if we can take a look at the shot first, see if we have the leverage there to go. If not, we're going to work our mesh. That in his mind, that's okay. I know what I'm going to see pre-snap. I'm going to go to my post first, and then I'm going to go to my mesh second. So it's a pure progression read. I think this is where they should fall. I know Chip is also Chip is a Y cross guy as well. That's where Day learned it. But I think mesh will be. I would love mesh to be their day 2 install, and they run those 2 concepts and they dress it up as many times as they can. But got to be able to protect it though, and that's my only worry with mesh. When you're thinking in college football, 2.5, 3 seconds is how quickly the ball should come out. Mesh tends to go on the longer side of that. So how they're going to protect that will be interesting to see this fall, because they do have some question marks up front. But I think it's a day 2 install for sure.
Well, that is just sort of maybe a little more than 101 look at the Ohio State passing game. There's going to be plenty more schematic talk on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That is where Justin and Devin and Mickey and Ross are all talking about schematic stuff, making you a smarter football fan. We say that at the end of every show. Seems like this is what we're talking about when we talk about that. And that was quite an extended discussion, and that was just the passing game. We probably worth, as soon as he said Chip Kelly's name at the end there, I thought, probably do a show like this about the run game as well, because when you think Chip Kelly, you think run game. So we should probably do a show on the run game as well. And of course, we'll probably have Devin back to talk about more on the defensive side of the ball. We got offensive guys, we got defensive guys, we got the whole field covered at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So if you want to see more schematic coverage, that is a place to be. Got some big stuff, exciting stuff planned, X's and O's wise for this fall. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about there. All on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse. The only way to get there, though, is to become a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com. This would be a great time to do it. We got Big Ten Media Days coming up next week. Lots of coverage coming to you from Indianapolis. Fall camp starts on August 1st. The season starts beginning of September. And then Where does it go from there? Well, we don't know yet, but it seems like it might be an exciting year in Columbus, Ohio. And a great place to spend that would be with us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.